ים ומלואו, יעלות שדה בכל אשר בו, אז יאמנו כל עשייה לפני השם קילה לשפוט הארץ. הלילה די ידי די Hello, my turn off the AC. Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. A Guten Erev Shabbos. Shabbos starts tonight. We're so excited. We're doing a double daf today. Very interesting page. We're going to encounter one of the key rules of the Sukkah that we've mentioned a few times, though not lately. This idea that a proper Sukkah can stand up to a typical wind, but collapse in an atypical wind. And we're going to see where that's from and how the sages derive it. Let's light up the darkness. Look at that. New candle. A little bit resistant. There we go. Lighting up the darkness. By the way, if you like the Let's Light Up the Darkness t-shirt, we've got it in our store at shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Who is with us as we do some learning on a Friday afternoon while getting ready for Shabbos? Yehudit saying Shabbat Shalom, Nina, Sal, and everyone wishing all a restful and rejuvenating Shabbos. Bill, Shabbat Shalom from Columbia, Missouri. Patrice in Utah. Paula in Chicago. PK in Colorado. Christo in Lubbock. Sounds like Moshav again. Yes, sir. That was a Moshav band from their Shabbat Volume 1 album. That was Shira LeHashem, Sing to God, a New Song. That's a Carlebach melody, and that's when we sing that melody, that psalm, on Friday nights in Arming, and I love it. Stephen in Augusta, Maine, in hospital with my father. Will need to watch replay. He is doing better. Stephen, may your father have a complete and speedy recovery. And we say amen. PK loves the shirt. Paula in the great Northwest. I love it. People are wishing each other a healing, wishing Stephen for his father, Refuah Shlema. Pauline in Arkansas. Paula loves the melody as well. Over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas, and reminding us that this is our second Shabbos of comfort. Last week was Shabbos Nachamu, and we have 7 Shabbats in a row as we are gearing up for Rosh Hashanah. Once we leave Tisha B'Av, there are 7 Shabbats of comfort where we read Haftorah's readings during the morning service from the prophet Isaiah, offering us comfort that things will get bad, but the sun will come up tomorrow, essentially is what he's saying. The sun will rise tomorrow in history, as it were. Today's class is sponsored by Renee Fott. A very simple dedication. She dedicates her sponsorship to you, meaning me, I guess, and our class. Bless you, Renee. May you be blessed. We thank you for making our class possible, helping us reach more people with more Torah. And may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. All right, a double daf. We're going to be covering pages 22 and 23 here in Tractate Sukkah, the 7th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Sukkot. We're in chapter 2. Chapter 1 was primarily about the technical requirements of the Sukkah. Chapter 2 focuses more on how we fulfill our obligation to reside in the Sukkah. But as we'll see, it also has some laws of the Sukkah itself. We're going to be completing our discussion of... Actually, we're going to be opening and completing our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 2 and opening our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Let's get right into it. 3 we're going to be somewhat quick with. 4 has got some fascinating material about it in the Gemara about Mishnah number 4. So, Mishnah number 3. A sukkah that is meduvlelet, and that term is not translated because it's not defined yet. We're going to define it in the Gemara. A sukkah that is meduvlelet and whose shade exceeds its sunlight is fit. And a sukkah whose roofing is thick like a house of sorts, even though it is so thick that the stars cannot be seen from within it, is fit. And so now we're alluding to these big laws, that very standard laws we come up again and again and again, that the schach, the roofing of the sukkah, it must be made from plant matter that is no longer attached to the ground, that is not susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity. Therefore, it hasn't been shaped or fabricated into a vessel or utensil, and that offers more shade than sunlight. But it has to pass some sunlight. And here we have a reference to the stars, that you should be able to see the stars through the roofing of the sukkah. So these rules we're already familiar with, but what does it mean that a sukkah that is meduvlelet and whose shade exceeds its sunlight is fit? And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of meduvlelet? It means an impoverished sukkah, an impoverished sukkah. So what is an impoverished sukkah? I.e., a sukkah whose roofing is sparse. Although at no point in the roofing is there a gap of 3 handbreadths. And Shmuel said it means that the roofing is aligned with one reed ascending and one reed descending. There are 2 layers of roofing, and with each reed on the upper layer situated directly above the space between each reed on the lower level. So here in our handy book of illustrations, we can talk a little bit about this. So we've already seen that it's definitely not desirable, but it's possible in cases of need to roof a sukkah with wood boards that haven't really been processed other than being cut, right? So they're just plain wood, but they've been cut. You should have branches and leaves. Palm branches are good. A mat of bamboo slats, etc. Those would all be good. But if you must, you could roof it with simple boards. And here what they're talking about is a situation like in these illustrations where you're just using boards as the roofing and you have 2 layers of them. This is what he's talking about, reeds, like upper reeds and lower reeds. And as you can see, there's 2 layers of those boards. And then there's a question of the alignment of the boards. Are the boards directly, like the top layer, is it directly above the bottom layer? Or is it kind of interspersed? So there's a layer like this, and then the next layer, instead of being like this, is like off like that, shifted a little bit like that. So light is going to get through this, but if it's really like that, offset, do we have enough gaps or not, given that they're kind of apart like that? So this is the question that's being asked. It's going to get into quite a technical discussion of this, and we're actually not going to focus so much on this discussion of Mishnah number 3. We'll continue a little bit. And the Gemara explains, Rav taught the first clause in the Mishnah as one law, as one halacha. And Shmuel taught that clause as 2 halachas, 2 laws. And Rav taught one law. The law of a sukkah that is meduvlelet. And what is a sukkah meduvlelet? It is a sparse sukkah. Nevertheless, as long as the shade exceeds the sunlight, the sukkah is fit. And Shmuel taught 2 laws. What is a sukkah meduvlelet? It is a disordered sukkah. And he teaches 2 laws. A disordered sukkah is fit, and one whose shade exceeds its sunlight is fit. And Abaye said, well, they taught that a sukkah with 2 layers of roofing, as we've seen 2 layers of boards, is fit only in a case where there is not a gap of at least 3 handbreadths between the upper layer and the lower layer. However, if there is a gap of 3 handbreadths between them, it is unfit. So if there's less than 3 handbreadths between the upper layer and the lower layer, we've seen that less than 3 handbreadths implies that they're really connected to each other, and it's really one layer of schach functioning together. If they're more than 3 handbreadths apart, so it's like 2 different sets of schach, and they're going to disagree about what to do with that. So Rava said, even if there is a gap of 3 handbreadths between them, we say that the 2 layers of roofing are not considered joined only in a case where there is not the width of a handbreadth in its upper roof. However, if there is the width of a handbreadth in its upper roof, meaning the width of a handbreadth between the boards in that layer, however, there is a width of a handbreadth in the upper roof, even if the gap between them is 3 handbreadths, the sukkah is fit because we say that the principle lower and cast down the upper level of the sukkah roofing down to the level of the lower sukkah roofing applies here. So what they're saying is if you've got that situation with the 2 layers, right? So even though they're more than 3 handbreadths vertical distance between the upper layer and the lower layer, so according to Rava, the fact that they're offset, even though there's more than 3 handbreadths between them, what we do is we lower and cast down. We pretend like the upper layer is going to sort of project its shade downward, which it does, so there's a good reason to do this, and therefore it could combine with that lower layer, and as long as the 2 of them together provide more shade than sunlight, it's going to work and it's going to be a fit sukkah. Where did the law come out on this, since we're going to abbreviate our discussion of this Mishnah? What is an impoverished sukkah? If one roofed a sukkah sparsely, and there are many empty spaces in the roofing, but none of the spaces measures 3 handbreadths, if altogether the shade is greater than the sunlight, the sukkah is fit in accordance with Rav's interpretation. Why is it that when we're talking about just one layer of sparsely roofed sukkah, like just these boards, kind of spread apart, why would it matter if there's more than 3 handbreadths between the boards? Because that's empty space of more than 3 handbreadths, and we've already seen that it's a halakha, it's a law, that if there's more than 3 handbreadths of empty space, no roofing at all, it's going to disqualify the sukkah. The sukkah is going to be unfit. With respect to one reed ascending and one descending, meaning 2 layers of boards, if the sukkah roofing is not leveled, but rather one section is higher and one section is lower, the sukkah is fit in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, as he is not disagreeing with Rav, but merely stating another law on top of that. And this is the law, provided that the space between the upper and lower roofing is not more than 3 handbreadths, in accordance with the opinion of Abaye. If the distance between them is greater than 3 handbreadths, but the segment of the upper roofing is 1 or more handbreadths wide, and it is aligned over a space in the lower roofing, then the sukkah is still fit. And this is because, in accordance with the opinion of Rava, the principle that we lower and cast down, sort of project that the shade drops down from the upper level to the lower level of roofing, is applied. We do apply this principle of lower and cast down the shade. So according to the Rima, if the sukkah roofing is lower and cast down is not really about the shade. It's as if that those upper boards are in a lower position, because we also do this principle of lower and cast down in other situations, like correcting an alleyway by creating a cross beam at the opening of the alleyway to permit carrying there on Shabbos. And if there are 2 cross beams, each of which is not thick enough to qualify as a cross beam, and one is above the other, but if we project downward that the 2, now this is like an overhead view, if each of these cross beams is not thick enough to function as a cross beam to correct the alley for carrying there and create an eruv for carrying on Shabbos, but now we could project that if the 2 of them were on the same horizontal level, together they would be thick enough, then we do that and we can carry in the alley that way. So that idea of lower and cast down exists in different bodies of Jewish law. In any case, we do use it for the sukkah roof. Now we skip forward a little bit to the B side of page 22. And the Mishnah continues, a sukkah whose shade exceeds its sunlight is fit. That's our standard rule. We see it over and over. Now, from the formulation of the Mishnah, it can be inferred that if its shade and sunlight are equal, the sukkah is unfit, right? Because the Mishnah was worded carefully and precisely. It said, if a sukkah whose shade exceeds its sunlight is fit. So the implication would be if the shade and the sunlight are equal, well, then the shade doesn't exceed the sunlight. And therefore, if they're equal, it would seem to be unfit. And the Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in a Mishnah, in another chapter, in this tractate, that a sukkah whose sunlight exceeds its shade is unfit? So in another Mishnah, it said if the sunlight exceeds the shade, the sukkah is unfit. Well, from that, we would imply that if the sunlight equals the shade, it is fit, because in that situation, the sunlight would not exceed the shade. So now we have two inferences from two different Mishnahs that contradict each other. From the first one, it seems like if the sunlight and shade are equal, the sukkah is unfit. And from the second one, it seems if the sunlight and the shade are equal, the sukkah is fit. So those are contradictory. What are we going to do with it? And the Gemara and the is fit. The inferences of the two Mishnayos are contradictory. And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Here, where the inference was that the sunlight and the shade are equal, the sukkah would be unfit, it is referring to the ratio of shade to sunlight from above. Meaning in the sukkah itself, if you look up at meaning in the roofing itself, if you look up at the roofing, and there's an equal amount of sunlight and shade coming through that roofing, that sukkah is going to be unfit, because the shade should exceed the sukkah. The shade should exceed the sunlight when you look up at the roofing itself. But in the other Mishnah, where the inference is that if the sunlight and the shade are equal, that the sukkah should be fit, we're not actually looking at the roofing, we're looking at the shade that the roofing casts onto the floor of the sukkah. If you look at the floor of the sukkah, and the sunlight and the shade are equal on the floor of the sukkah, this is going to be a fit sukkah. Why? Because if you think about a pattern of boards, let me get back to our handy dandy illustration here. Right, so you have two figures right up there. Okay, let me get off the glare of my lighting. Okay, so there, what you see is you look at the shade on the floor of the sukkah. In one case, there's more sun than shade. In the other case, there's more shade than sun. But where they're equal, if the shade on the bottom on the floor is equal to the sunlight, it's going to count as a fit sukkah. Why? Because the light diffuses as it passes through the sukkah roof, right? The shade that's cast on the ground is not an exact representation of what's going on above, because the light kind of diffuses once it travels past the schach and reaches the floor of the sukkah. It's almost like there's a little bit of an interference pattern, if you remember physics at all, and the light kind of spreads out after it passes through the roof. So if the sunlight and shade are equal on the floor of the sukkah, it's because the light has expanded a little bit, and you can be sure that at the level of the roof, which is where it really counts, there the shade exceeded the sunlight. Right, so to read it out, the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Here where the inference was that when the sunlight and shade are equal, the sukkah is unfit, it is referring to the ratio of shade to sunlight at the roof level. And there, where the inference was that if the sunlight and shade are equal, the sukkah is fit, it is referring to the ratio of shade to sunlight from below, meaning on the sukkah floor. And the two inferences are not contradictory, as the lower in the sukkah one observes the light, the more diffused it is. Therefore, if the shade and the sunlight are equal on the floor of the sukkah, clearly the roofing is sufficiently dense and it exceeds the gaps. And Rav Papa said, and that is the meaning of the folk saying with regard to light, like a zuz above, like an istera below. An istera is a coin that is bigger than a zuz. So a zuz of shade above, or a zuz of light above, becomes an istera of light below. A little bit of light coming, in other words, light coming through a little hole above can provide quite a bit of light at the level of the sukkah floor. And it kind of makes sense. You can even imagine like a pinhole, high up, and you're shining light through the pinhole, right? And like you look up and you only see a pinhole of light in this whole big ceiling. But it could actually provide quite a bit of light in a room where that's the only light source, because it diffuses and light kind of expands into the dark space below. And the Mishnah continues, a sukkah whose roofing is thick like a type of house is fit. And the sages taught in a baraisa with regard to a sukkah whose roofing is thick like a type of house, although it is so dense that the stars are not visible from within it, the sukkah is fit. However, if it is so thick that the rays of the sun are also not visible from within it, Beis Shammai deem the sukkah unfit, and Beis Hillel deem it fit. You should be able to look up and see through the roofing of the sukkah, see the sky, even ideally see stars at night, even though that is very undense. It still obviously has to provide more shade than light. But ideally, you should still be able to see stars through it at night and definitely be able to see sunlight through it during the day. And that actually concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in Tractate Sukkah. Now we go to Mishnah number 4. This one is really interesting. Mishnah 4. In the Sukkah, and now we're at the bottom of 22b. In the case of one who establishes his sukkah at the top of a wagon or at the top of a ship, although it is portable, the sukkah is portable because it's been established on a vehicle, right? It's some kind of mode of transport, either a wagon or a ship. Nevertheless, the sukkah is fit, as it is sufficient for a sukkah to be a temporary residence. You don't have to build a permanent residence. A sukkah is a temporary residence. And one may ascend and enter it even on the first festival day. We'll see why they're making that, why they're clarifying that. In the case of one who establishes his sukkah at the top of a tree, like a treehouse sukkah, or on top of a camel, on the back of a camel. Remember, the minimum area of a sukkah is 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths. And you know, if you've ever ridden on a camel, you see like sometimes they build a little platform on the back of a camel. Could easily be 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths, which is, 7 handbreadths, maybe like that, by like that. You could easily, right, because the minimum size of a sukkah is that you should be able to get your head and upper body and a bit of your table in there so that you could eat your meal. So you definitely could have a small sukkah, a tiny sukkah on top of a camel. Is it a fit sukkah? So one who establishes his sukkah at the top of a tree or on top of a camel, the sukkah is fit, but one may not ascend and enter that sukkah on the first day of the festival. Meaning, Sukkot is a week-long festival, 8 days outside of Israel, 7 days in Israel. But the first and final days of Sukkot, like the first and final days of Pesach, are full-blown festival days, meaning they have all the restrictions of Shabbos in terms of you're not allowed to do work. The only difference between the first day of the festival, the last day of the festival, and Shabbos is that on Shabbos you can't cook either, but on a festival day you can cook. You can cook on the first day of Sukkot, the first day of Passover, and the first day of Shavuos, but you can't do any other kind of work. And this sukkah that's built in the tree or on the camel, the kind of work that you're not allowed to do, and therefore you can't enter that sukkah on the first day of the festival, is you can't make use of animals and you can't make use of trees. Those are prohibited by rabbinic decree. If 2 of the walls of the sukkah are in the tree, and one is established on the ground by a person, or 2 of the walls are established on the ground by a person, and one is in the tree, the sukkah is fit, but one may not ascend and enter it on the festival day because it is prohibited to use the tree. However, if 3 of the walls are established on the ground by a person, and 1 of the walls is in the tree, then, since the sukkah already contains the minimum number of walls that are required to be a fit sukkah, it is a fit sukkah since it's not relying on the wall that is established in the tree, and therefore one may enter such a sukkah on the first day of the festival. And the Mishnah summarizes that this is the principle. Any case where if the tree were removed, the sukkah would be able to remain standing in and of itself, it is a fit sukkah, and one may ascend and enter it on the festival since the tree is not its primary support. So let's take a look at some of these figures, help us see this. Right, so here we have the sukkah built on a wagon, right there. And then over here, we have the sukkah built on a ship, right? Look, up near, so I have to angle the page so it doesn't catch the glare of the light. But you can see the sukkah, if you look carefully, is at the top of the ship. Over here now we have a sukkah built in a tree. So you could have a sukkah in a treehouse sukkah, but you couldn't use it on the first day of the festival. And there's the sukkah built on the camel. Also, it's a fit sukkah, but you can't use it on the first day of the festival, according to the Mishnah. Then we have these cases like this, where the sukkah has 3 walls up there, but 1 wall is down below, right? And so that helps a little, but not enough. Same thing with 2 walls below. But the last figure down there, there's actually 3 walls of the sukkah don't rely on the tree. So the tree is kind of incidental to this sukkah, so you could use it on the first day of the festival. And then we're going to be discussing, so I'll just show the figure now, what happens if you have a sukkah that has only 2 walls, but the 3rd wall is an animal. Like you actually have an animal standing there and acting as the 3rd wall. Will that count as a fit sukkah? We shall see. Okay, Gemara. Whoa. Off. I have my phone on Do Not Disturb, but there was a breakthrough call. It's going to have to wait. Okay, Gemara. In accordance with whose opinion is our Mishnah? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, as it is taught in a Baraisa, in the case of one who establishes his sukkah at the top of the ship. Rabban Gamliel says, unfit. You can't build a sukkah on a ship. Rabbi Akiva deems it fit. And there was an incident. Now, it's good that you can build a sukkah on a ship, at least according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, because what if you're on a cruise during Sukkah? You'd want to be able to fulfill your obligation to dwell in the sukkah, at least to take your meals in the sukkah. And if you can't build a sukkah on a ship, how are you going to do that? Now, where did this law come out before we continue? If one establishes a sukkah on top of a ship, the following distinction applies. If it cannot withstand a typical land wind, it is unfit. If it can withstand a typical land wind, then even if it cannot withstand a typical sea wind, it is fit, in accordance with Abaye's interpretation of the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. So let's get back to this incident which occurred. The incident involving Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva, who were coming on a ship. Right. So back then, by the way, ocean travel in the times of the Mishna and the Gemara, very dangerous. You know, they didn't have any kind of advanced navigation. Their ships were not even the advanced wooden ships of the British Navy in the 17 and 1800s. I mean, you know, ships were sailing around the Mediterranean for thousands of years, but they were very vulnerable to the elements. And if a big storm came up, it could easily happen that the ship would capsize and all hands lost. So, dangerous stuff. Okay, but Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva were traveling on a ship. And it was Sukkot. Rabbi Akiva arose and built a sukkah on the top of the ship. And the next day, the wind blew and uprooted it. And Rabban Gamliel said to him, Akiva, where is your sukkah? And what he was meaning by that is that the sukkah was unfit from the start. And here's the proof, because a wind could just blow away your sukkah. So Abaye said regarding this incident, everyone agrees that in a case where the sukkah is unable to withstand a typical wind by land, the sukkah is of no consequence because it is not even a temporary residence. So when you build a sukkah, it has to be capable of withstanding a typical wind by land. If there's a huge wind, a hurricane, a tornado, a massive storm, and your sukkah blows away, that's fine. The sukkah is a fit sukkah because it's a temporary residence. It's not like a house that has to be able to stand up to an atypical wind, like a tornado. I mean, you know, even a house won't stand up to a tornado, but like a serious storm wind, a house will stand up to it, a sukkah won't, and that's okay. But what the sukkah does have to be able to do is to stand up to a typical wind, like kind of daily winds that we experience all the time. So everyone agrees where's Abaye talking? Everyone agrees that in the case where the sukkah is unable to withstand the typical wind by land, so that is not a fit sukkah. It's too fragile, and everyone agrees that that is not a fit sukkah. Where they disagree, according to Abaye, is in a case where the sukkah is able to withstand a typical land wind, but is unable to withstand an atypical wind by land, which is the equivalent of a typical sea wind, right? So winds by sea, especially on a moving ship, are going to be much stronger than winds by land, right? Because the sea is just endlessly flat, and those winds can really pick up strength as they travel over the sea. And so typical sea winds are quite a bit stronger than typical land winds, right? So Rabban Gamliel holds, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, we require a permanent residence, right? A sukkah has to have the ability to withstand winds like a permanent residence. And since it is not able to withstand an atypical land wind, which is like a typical sea wind, it is of no consequence as a residence, and one does not fulfill his obligation with it. But Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabban Gamliel. Rabbi Akiva holds, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, we require a temporary residence. And since it is able to withstand a typical land wind, it is fit, although it is unable to withstand a typical sea wind. Now that is the law regarding a sukkah by land. So now we would ask, well, if you are at sea on a ship, do we revise that law? Now that you are on a ship at sea, should we require that the sukkah be able to withstand a typical sea wind? Or is it enough that it can, even though it's built on a ship at sea, that it only needs to be able to withstand a typical land wind? That's the question. The Mishnah continues. And that's where they leave it. That's actually where they leave the discussion. But as we saw, where the law actually ends up is, according to Abaye's interpretation of the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that the sukkah on a ship at sea is good enough if it could have withstood a typical land wind, even though a typical sea wind would knock it over. Now we go back to the question of building a sukkah on a camel. The Mishnah continues. So if one establishes his sukkah on top of a camel, the sukkah is fit. And the Gemara asks, well, who is the Tana of the Mishnah? Who is the rabbi of the Mishnah? This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, as it was taught in a Baraisa. In the case of one who establishes his sukkah on top of an animal, Rabbi Meir says it is fit. Rabbi Yehuda says it is not fit. And the Gemara asks, what is the rationale for the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says you cannot build a sukkah on top of an animal? The Gemara answers that Rabbi Yehuda would say, it is as the verse states, Deuteronomy 16:13, you shall prepare for yourself the festival of Sukkot for 7 days. Now, we've used this verse in the past, you shall prepare for yourself, meaning that you have to build a sukkah for the purpose of fulfilling Sukkot. If you have a structure that in every way fulfills the requirements of a sukkah, but it was built for some other purpose, then you have to go and alter that sukkah a little bit, move the roofing around, move the boards around, etc., so that you can say that you prepared this structure for Sukkot, so that you could fulfill your obligation to dwell in the sukkah during Sukkot. Now we're using the same verse for a different teaching. It says you shall prepare for yourself the festival of Sukkot for 7 days. Now, any 7-day period, 7 consecutive days, is going to include Shabbos, right? And is going to include the first day of the festival. Sometimes those are the same day, sometimes not. So from this, Rabbi Yehuda derives a sukkah that is suitable for 7 days is called a sukkah, while a sukkah that is not suitable for all 7 days of the festival is not called a sukkah. Since it is prohibited to climb upon an animal on the first day of the festival of Sukkot, just as it would be prohibited to climb on top of an animal on Shabbos, therefore the sukkah on top of the animal is unfit, as it cannot be used all 7 days of the festival. This is according to Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Meir, who holds that a sukkah built on top of an animal is fit, how would he answer? He would say, by Torah law, this sukkah is also suitable for use on a festival and on Shabbos, as there is no Torah prohibition against using an animal on those days, and it was a rabbinic decree from the sages who said you cannot make use of an animal on Shabbos or Yom Tov, Shabbos or a festival. That's by rabbinic decree, and it's a fence around the Torah. If you make use of the animal, you will come to do a forbidden labor. But climbing on the animal or in some way using the animal is not automatically a violation of the 39 prohibited labors of Shabbos, the 38 prohibited labors of a festival where you are allowed to cook, but you can't do all the other kinds of work. But the rabbis issued a decree because if you make use of that animal, you're going to come to do one of those other forbidden labors. You know, whether it's tying knots or doing work with the animal, etc. So, however, if one utilized his animal as a wall, and so according to Rabbi Meir, since it's only by rabbinic decree that you can't make use of the animal, of course he would agree that we have to follow rabbinic decrees and you can't make use of the animal. But the fact that it's only by rabbinic decree and not by Torah law means that since a sukkah is a structure that we build by Torah law, it's not going to be rendered unfit just because making use of an animal in some way that's otherwise not labor violates a rabbinic decree. So that's why Rabbi Meir would say you can build that animal. It is a fit sukkah that's built on top of an animal. You can't use it on the first day, but it is not unfit automatically, and therefore it is a fit sukkah on the rest of the days. However, if one utilized his animal as a wall for a sukkah, right? It's a sukkah that only has 2 walls. A sukkah needs to have 3 walls, even though the third wall only has to be 1 handbreadth wide. But if you've only got 2 walls, can you walk your animal over and just have him stand there? Let's say it's a cow. Like, that cow is going to be large enough that it satisfies the minimum requirements of a partition to act as a wall, act as the third wall of the sukkah. Can you do that? Now they switch. If you're using, if the third wall of your sukkah is an animal that's just standing there, Rabbi Meir would say unfit, and Rabbi Yehuda would say it is fit. As Rabbi Meir would say, well, with regard to any animate object, a living being, one may neither establish it as a wall for the sukkah nor as a side post placed at the entrance to an alleyway to render it permitted to carry there on Shabbos, nor as one of the upright boards placed around wells so that you could draw water from it on Shabbos, right? Those corner posts that would create a private domain around the well so that you could take water from inside the well, which would be its own private domain, out into the private domain above it. Now it's all one private domain. You could draw water on Shabbos. But you can't use an animal not for the corner post, not for the side post in an alley, nor as the wall of a sukkah, per the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Nor can you use an animal as the covering for a grave. In the name of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, the sages said, nor may one write bills of divorce on it. Why can you not lean on an animal when you're writing a bill of divorce? That's actually derived in another section of the Talmud based on a verse, not relevant today. The point is that Rabbi Meir would not allow you to use an animal as the wall of a sukkah, and Rabbi Yehuda would. So the Gemara asks, what is the rationale for the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who rules that an animal is unfit for use as a partition in areas of halakha, of Jewish law, where a partition is required? And Abaye said, to explain, it is due to the concern lest the animal die, leaving the sukkah without a wall. And Rabbi Zeir said, it is due to the concern that the animal might flee. And the Gemara explains the practical difference between those two opinions. In the case where one established a wall with a tied elephant, everyone agrees that the sukkah is fit as even if the elephant dies and falls, its carcass is still going to have the height necessary, the 10 handbreadths necessary to be fit for the wall of the sukkah. And where people disagree is in the case of an elephant that is not tied. According to the one who said it is due to the concern lest the animal die, well, we are not concerned in this case, as the carcass would remain a fit wall. But according to the one who said it is due to a decree lest the animal flee, we are concerned if the elephant is not tied up, it might walk away, and then the sukkah only has 2 walls, and it is no longer a fit sukkah. So according to Rabbi Meir, it was never a fit sukkah, even when the animal was standing there, because of the potential for the animal to walk away or to die. And the Gemara asks, according to the one who said it is due to a decree, they made a decree because in case the animal dies, let us also be concerned that it could flee, as that too is a reasonable concern. Rather, this is the explanation. In the case where one established a wall with an elephant that is not tied, everyone agrees that the sukkah is not fit because it could walk away. Where they disagree is in the case of a tied animal. According to the one who said it is due to a decree lest the animal die, we are concerned the animal could die and render the sukkah unfit. And according to the one who said it is due to a decree lest the animal flee, then we are not concerned the sukkah is fit. The Gemara asks, and according to the one who said it is due to a decree lest the animal flee, let us also be concerned that it could die. And the Gemara answers, that is not a concern because death is not common. It's very unlikely that this animal that is tied up there and is going to serve as a wall of the sukkah should happen to die out of nowhere during this holiday of Sukkot. So the sages do not issue decrees with regard to uncommon circumstances. And the Gemara asks, but according to all opinions, isn't there the space between the legs, which is like a breach in the wall? How can one establish a partition whose breached segment exceeds its standing segment? And the Gemara answers, well, he establishes a partition for it by filling the gaps with hard palm leaves and laurel leaves, sealing the breach. And then you might ask, well, couldn't he just make a wall out of these palm leaves in the first place and not rely on the animal to act as the wall? But okay, we're just setting up a hypothetical situation and asking why it would work and why it wouldn't. And now I'm almost done, so if you've got comments or questions, get them in. The Gemara asks further, and even though there is no concern that the animal will die during the week of Sukkot, perhaps the animal will crouch down, leaving a wall that is less than 10 handbreadths high. And the Gemara answers, well, this is referring to a case where the animal is tied with ropes from above so that it cannot crouch. Based on that explanation, the Gemara asks, well, and according to the one who said we issue that decree that the sukkah is unfit because the animal could die, well, there is also no concern because it is tied with ropes from above. If it dies, it won't make any difference. It'll still be there acting as the wall. And the Gemara answers, well, sometimes the 10 handbreadth wall consists of an animal that is only a little bit higher than 7 handbreadths, and that it is established adjacent to the roofing, so it's close enough to the top, it's within 3 handbreadths, and that's why it can act as a 10 handbreadth partition, even though it is not full 10 handbreadths tall. And once it dies, it contracts to be more than 3 handbreadths away from the roofing, and therefore would render the sukkah unfit. And it does not enter his mind to fix it because it is not noticeable. In that case, the principle of lavud, connecting something less than 3 handbreadths apart, would not apply, and the result would be a wall that is less than the minimum required height. And the Gemara asks, and did Abaye actually say that Rabbi Meir is concerned about the potential death of this animal that's acting as a sukkah wall, and Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned? Didn't we learn in a Mishna, with regard to the daughter of an Israelite who married a priest and her husband went to a country overseas? So now what we're going to look at is a completely different case and ask the question, is Rabbi Yehuda really unconcerned that the animal could die and then the partition would no longer be there? Because it's unusual that an animal would die during this stated period, so we don't issue that decree. Now we're going to look at another body of law where Rabbi Yehuda agrees with those who say we are concerned that somebody could die. Namely, especially in ancient times, if a man went off to war, there's a very good chance that he might not come back. Even worse, okay, it's terrible that he could die, but if they knew he died, okay, so his widow is now officially a widow and she's free to remarry. But what if the guy just disappears? Maybe he falls in battle, but they never found his body. So now she's not officially a widow. She's in that she's in that awful state, in between state of being an abandoned wife, like a husband who just disappeared. He might still be alive, so she can't remarry, but he's probably dead, but there's no body, so she's just stuck. She can't remarry, and she's, waiting for someone to either report that they saw this man die, in which case then she would be free to remarry, or that he comes back because he actually is still alive, etc. Now, a sort of subset of that body of law is in the case of a woman who's the daughter of an Israelite, meaning her father is not a Cohen. So she's not permitted to eat teruma, the food that's set aside only for priests to eat, that's donated to the priests. She's not allowed to eat that until she marries a priest. Once she marries a priest, she is allowed to eat teruma. If her husband dies, she's no longer able to eat teruma. She returns to the status of her father's house. So a woman who's herself not the daughter of a priest, but who marries a priest, and now he goes on a journey, can she continue to eat teruma? Yes, because we presume that the man is still alive. Can we always make that presumption? Not in every case, as we will see. Didn't we learn in a Mishna, with regard to the daughter of an Israelite who married a priest and her husband went to a country overseas, she may continue to partake of teruma, the food set aside for priests, as the wife of a priest, because the presumptive status of her husband is that he is alive. So apparently, the absence of evidence to the contrary, the presumption is that one who is alive remains alive. However, we raised a contradiction from another Mishnah. If one is leaving his place of residence in order to preclude a situation where his wife would have the status of a deserted wife, he gives her a conditional bill of divorce and stipulates, "This is your bill of divorce that will take effect 1 hour prior to my death." Right? So that's the situation where if the guy disappears and doesn't reappear for a long time, she can say, well, we're divorced. If he does come back, okay, well, then maybe they can deal with it. If there's certain situations where you can remarry even if you've been divorced. Not all situations. But here, just in case the guy disappears and it seems like he's never coming back and she would be stranded, she could say, well, I've got a bill of divorce, and she could use this bill of divorce. Now, it's a conditional bill of divorce that takes effect 1 hour prior to my death. So if he gave her this conditional bill of divorce, it is prohibited for her to partake of teruma immediately due to the concern lest he die in the next hour. So apparently there is concern lest one die at any point. And Abaye said in resolving the contradiction, this is not difficult. This Mishnah, where the presumption is that one who is alive remains alive, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who is not concerned about potential death. And that Mishnah, where there is concern that someone could die at any point, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who is concerned about potential death scenarios. What is the law on this? This is your bill of divorce 1 hour prior to my death. If a priest says to his wife, the daughter of an Israelite, this is your bill of divorce that will take effect 1 hour prior to my death, then from that moment it is prohibited for his wife to eat teruma, as most rabbis of the Mishnah maintain that there is a concern about potential death. Why is there a concern about potential death? Because he gave her this bill of divorce conditional on his death. In other words, he's going into a perilous situation and where he could disappear and he could die and it would never be reported back that he died. That's why he gave her this conditional bill of divorce. And further notes on this. A man gives his wife a bill of divorce with this stipulation when, for example, they have no children and he seeks to prevent her from being subjected to chalitza or levirate marriage to his brother. Since he does not actually wish to divorce her, he seeks to prevent the divorce from taking effect for as long as possible. However, since one cannot divorce his wife after he dies, it must take effect while he is still alive. Therefore, he stipulates that divorce will take effect just before his death. So it's a different situation. The problem here isn't that he's worried that he'll disappear. He's worried that if he dies and they didn't have children, then she's going to have to either go through chalitza or marry his brother so that, the brother can sire an heir for the dead brother. But not every woman wants to go through that. So if he does indeed die, then that bill of divorce will take effect 1 hour prior to his death. So now she's a divorced woman, not a widow. Technically, she was divorced before he died, and she won't have to go through that whole ritual and procedure of being a yavama, being the widow of a brother who died childless, and then she has to go through this ceremony with the guy's surviving brother. Either marry the brother or go through a public ceremony where he says, I refuse to become your husband. And it's kind of embarrassing for her, for him, and the husband wants to spare her from having to go through that in the case that he dies. And so then the question is, having given her this conditional bill of divorce, can she keep it, since he's a Cohen, can she still be eating teruma while this conditional bill of divorce exists? And the answer is no, because he might die at any moment. Okay, that's what we've got today. Let's go to comments or questions. Ooh, Nina's reporting. No questions. Okay. However, here's a crazy one from Nina that she's typing as I'm reading, so hold on. If a bunch of people are in a situation where they can't make a sukkah, can they take turns making walls for the others so that they can say blessings of a sukkah? What a good question, Nina. They just don't have the materials. They're in a situation where they can't build a sukkah, but they could maybe just support enough palm leaves or something to act as the roof, and their bodies are going to create the walls of the sukkah. I can't remember if we encounter a case like that. But what about using the animal as the wall of the sukkah? An animal as a sukkah wall. It is permitted to establish a sukkah wall with an animal if the animal is tied in place in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in his dispute with Rabbi Meir. So it seems to me like, since you can use an animal as a wall of a sukkah, why not use a human in these exigent circumstances, just so that you could take a meal in the sukkah and make a blessing there? It should work even better than an animal, because the animal, doesn't really know that its obligation is to stand there so that somebody can fulfill a mitzvah. A person would understand that, and so the person should qualify as the wall. This is just my opinion, my thinking. I think maybe we are going to run into this question a little bit later. I can't quite remember, but I think we are going to run into that question. So it seems to me like it should work, and it's a really good question, Nina. Okay, that's what I've got today. My pals, let us hope that God gives us the ability to keep lighting up the darkness by learning together and sharing what we learn. May we all be blessed with a sweet, meaningful, healthy, and uplifting Shabbos when it comes in this evening. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night for page 24, Motzi Shabbos, about half an hour after Shabbos ends here in Los Angeles. All the best and good Shabbos.